Greetings, kittens. Welcome to the Podcast of Doom, the podcast devoted to epic failure analysis. I'm your host, David Appleson. The Podcast of Doom has now been in production for more than 5 years, starting with our first podcast about the Peshtigo fire in October 2013. Through that time, I've produced more than 50 episodes, not including announcement updates and other information and analysis. When I first started this podcast, I had the ambition of putting out one episode every week. 1 week turned into 2 weeks, until finally I settled on about one episode every month. If I had kept episodes to a length of 25 to 30 minutes as originally planned, I'm sure I could have put out more than 100. But thanks to the positive feedback and encouragement to keep the episodes long, some of the later episodes ran anywhere from 50 minutes to more than 2 hours. Because of the amount of research and effort put into every episode, which is about 50 to 60 hours each, I find it untenable to continue. Other aspects of my life are not getting sufficient attention. Work has been more demanding. I need to pay more attention to my physical health, my mental health, and to my loved ones. Therefore, I'm announcing the retirement of the Podcast of Doom. It has been a pleasure producing this podcast. I could never have imagined the things I would learn and the people I would meet when I started this endeavor. Altogether, it has been an enormously positive experience. I learned far more than I thought I would about humanity, the good and the bad, the caring and the selfish, the brilliant and the not so bright. In those 50 episodes, we managed to cover a lot of ground, from a devastating fire in a 19th century Wisconsin town to fires in a Vienna opera house, a musical theater in Chicago, and a packed nightclub in contemporary Rhode Island. We examined a tiger with a taste for human flesh, a Hungarian countess with a taste for killing peasant girls, and her cousin who had a predilection for impaling his enemies on spikes. We looked at the worst plane crash ever, which happened on the runway at Tenerife Airport in the Canary Islands, the mid-air terrorist explosion of an Air India 747 jetliner to the failed takeoff of the Concorde supersonic jet. We have looked at environmental disasters such as the Great London Smog, the heat waves in Paris and Moscow, and the potato famine in Ireland. There were a number of military disasters such as the sinking of the cruiser, the USS Indianapolis, the German passenger ship, the Wilhelm Gustloff, the British retreat from Kabul, Afghanistan, the Swedish Karelian March through Norway, and Napoleon Bonaparte's failed invasion of Russia. We studied the failure of modern technology during the leak of toxic gas in Bhopal, India, the Piper Alpha oil platform fire, the collapse of the Banquo Dam in China, the potential collapse of the Mosul Dam in Iraq, the Challenger and Columbia space shuttle crashes, and the failure of the nuclear reactor in Chernobyl, Ukraine. We looked at a number of cult figures such as Jim Jones in Guyana, South America, John Africa in Philadelphia, David Koresh in Waco, Texas, Geronimus Cornelius on the Dutch ship the Batavia, and the Old Man in the Mountain, who inspired a group of famous assassins in Mesopotamia, as well as James Reed's grip on power over the doomed Donner Party. We looked at cult of personality figures who held entire nations in their grip, such as Mao Zedong in China and Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union. We examined a couple of human crushes, both in England, with one involving children in Sunderland during the 19th century and another involving football fans in Sheffield in the 20th century. There were forced marches among indigenous Americans along the Trail of Tears and the Death March of Bataan in the Philippines during World War II. We reviewed earthquakes in Lisbon, floods in Louisiana, a volcano in Martinique, landslides in Peru, and tsunamis throughout the Indian Ocean, and the unusual but natural event that suffocated thousands at Lake Nyos in Cameroon, Africa. We covered the two worst pandemics in human history, the bubonic plague of the 14th century and the Spanish influenza epidemic of the 20th century. There were also 3 genocides involving Rwandans in the 1990s, Cambodians in the 1970s, and Armenians at the turn of the last century. All of those episodes will remain available. Our investigation has covered more than 2,000 years of history across 6 continents. I am including the Batavia as having occurred near Australia. As outlined earlier, these have included a wide range of different disasters and events that involve the deaths of many people. While it is certainly not exhaustive of all of history's calamities, it certainly is a good overview. At this point, I feel if I continued the podcast, while there are still countless disasters to cover, the overall subject matter would become somewhat repetitious. There will always be new lessons to be learned from our large-scale mistakes, but I feel I have given you a good cross-section in this podcast. May we always continue to learn from our mistakes. It is the best way to improve ourselves and prevent future mistakes. I'd like to thank everyone who wrote in with suggestions. I would estimate that as many as half of the episodes were based on listener suggestions, and they were good ones. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to use all of your suggestions because those came in faster than the rate at which I produced each episode. Generally, I looked for episode suggestions that adhered to the theme of the show, which is large-scale historical disasters, particularly those in which it was easy to identify the human-caused errors that made them so catastrophic. I measured the scale by the number of fatalities, which is not always the best way to go, but if you look up worst disasters in Wikipedia, you will see those are also measured by number of fatalities. Also, I tended to shy away from those disasters that happened too recently, because not all of the information and analysis has come in. Here's some of the suggestions I received but did not use. Listener BD suggested the Armagh runaway train, which happened in Ireland in 1889 when a disconnected portion of a passenger train lost braking control on a steep incline and crashed into another oncoming train, killing 80 people. It was Ireland's worst rail disaster. BD also recommended the Quintins Hill rail disaster, which occurred in Scotland in 1915 and was a multiple train wreck. The first crash occurred when an Army troop train collided with a stationary local train. 1 minute later, the wreckage of both trains was hit by a passenger train. The impact caused a nearby gas light to ignite and set the wooden carriages of the trains on fire. The official death toll was 226, but not all of the bodies were recovered. Quintins Hill remains Britain's worst rail disaster. The worst rail disaster anywhere was actually mentioned in our last episode on the 2004 tsunami. The flooding and swamping of a passenger train in Thelwada, Sri Lanka during that disaster killed more than 1,700 people. BD, along with others, also brought up the capsizing of the SS Eastland in Chicago in 1915. The Eastland was a chartered steamer that was overpacked with more than 2,500 passengers. The weight of the passengers plus the weight of extra lifeboats added in the wake of the Titanic disaster caused the ship to list and to eventually roll, drowning 848 passengers, most of whom were beneath deck attempting to stay warm on that chilly day. Thank you, BD. Listener NC suggested the Tlatelolco massacre, which happened just prior to the opening of the 1968 Summer Olympics in Mexico City. After several days of protests against the Mexican government prior to the games, military forces opened fire on a large gathering of protesters on October 2nd, killing demonstrators as well as innocent bystanders. The U.S. government estimated the death toll at 44, but other sources say the total was closer to 300 to 400 people. Listener SM suggested an episode about the Paraguayan War. That war was fought from 1864 to 1870, and it pitted the nation of Paraguay against the Triple Alliance of Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay, which to me hardly sounds fair. Even against these odds, the Paraguayans won a number of initial victories, but eventually the superior resources of the alliance led to the defeat of Paraguay. It was a brutal war, and it resulted in Paraguay losing as much as 69% of its population, with only 12% of the remaining population being adult males. Listener JR suggested the heat wave that hit Chicago in 1995, after hearing the episode on the Paris and Moscow heat waves. That heat wave killed 739 people, just in that city. As in Paris, those who died were mostly poor and or elderly. Also, as in Moscow and Paris, large cities like Chicago develop into urban heat islands during heat waves because the buildings and pavement tend to trap heat. Concerns about crime meant many people kept their apartments and houses locked up, trapping more heat. Listener MP suggested an episode on Japan's infamous Unit 731, a chemical and biological research facility set up by the Imperial Japanese government in Manchuria during World War II. The facility was known for conducting lethal experiments on human test subjects. The experiments included human vivisection without anesthesia, the intentional infection of various diseases, experimental amputation, the testing of biological agents, exposure to frostbite, human targets of weapons testing, exposure of lethal doses of X-rays, and centrifugal torture, which involves spinning human subjects at lethal speeds. Most of the subjects were Chinese, but they also included Mongolians, Koreans, Soviets, and American and Allied POWs. The number of people killed at Unit 731 is estimated to be at least 3,000. The number of deaths during the war from biological agents developed at Unit 731 is estimated to be as high as 500,000. They actually managed to find a way to weaponize fleas. The United States came to an agreement with the perpetrators, granting immunity from prosecution in exchange for information obtained from the experiments, while the Soviets put most of the perpetrators they captured on trial and sentenced many of these to labor camps in the Soviet Union. Today, a portion of Unit 731 has been turned into a war crimes museum by the Chinese government. Listener R.O. suggested the eruption of Mount Tambora, which resulted in the year without a summer. The eruption of Tambora in 1815, located on the island of Sumbawa in Indonesia within the Pacific Ring of Fire, was the largest recorded volcanic eruption. Estimates of the dead range from 70,000 to 100,000, including those killed by pyroclastic flows or rolling clouds of superhot gas, as the famine, disease, and hunger that followed in the aftermath of the eruption claimed a higher number of lives. That was followed by the year without a summer in 1816. The release of more than 41 cubic kilometers, or 10 billion tons of particles, into the atmosphere caused a darkening of the skies all around the planet, and an average lower global temperature of 1 degree Fahrenheit. The dark skies ruined harvests in Europe, North America, and Asia. There were food riots in Germany, floods in China, and killer frosts in the United States. It is difficult to determine the exact number of deaths caused by the year without a summer, but is thought to be easily in the hundreds of thousands. Listener E.S. suggested studying some of the tactical and strategic mistakes made leading up to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. That is a great topic, but there is so much second-guessing involved when it comes to studying military history. It could be a lifelong podcast project. Listener S.R. in Saskatoon suggested Canada's genocidal program to eliminate the Plains Indigenous tribes by slaughtering all the bison, something that also occurred in the United States. And he also suggested the 1885 Métis Rebellion, a great topic and probably a great podcast in itself. SR also recommended the Jacobin Reign of Terror that followed the French Revolution. I avoided that one because it is such a massive topic, and I had also listened to Mike Duncan's Revolutions podcast, which covered the whole French Revolution in detail, and I felt there was nothing I could add or enhance to his great series. But I am fascinated by that whole period of French history, from the Revolution through to Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo. BK suggested an episode on the Love Canal. Anyone not from the United States or born within the last 30 years may not have heard of Love Canal, but it was a major industrial pollution incident. Years of dumping chemical pollutants into the canal led to leaching of these toxins into residents' backyards during the particularly snowy year of 1977. The result was a number of health problems for those residents, including increased rates of miscarriages, birth defects, nervous disorders, and cancer. Listener Evie gave me a whole list of suggestions, so here are a few. The Dutch and British North Sea flood of 1953, the Dutch St. Elizabeth's flood of 1421, the Heysel Stadium crush in 1985 that killed 39 people, the Love Parade disaster, which killed 21 people in Duisburg, Germany in 2010. It's another crush incident that occurred during an electronic music celebration when attendees broke into a panic in and around a crowded tunnel. IA, a fellow Washingtonian, suggested the Wellington Avalanche in 1910. It killed 96 people when an avalanche of snow plowed into the train depot in the town of Wellington, Washington. It was the worst avalanche in U.S. history. LY suggested the Nanking massacres. SA recommended the 1966 Aberfan disaster in Wales, a landslide that killed 116 school children and 28 adults. SL suggested the Deepwater Horizon oil platform accident. JSC expressed interest in the Armero volcano in Colombia, which killed more than 23,000 people in 1985. SG recommended the SL-1 accident in Idaho, a seldom talked about nuclear power plant that melted down in 1961 and killed 3 people. Listener JF recommended the Niterói circus fire, also in 1961, which killed more than 500 people. He also recommended the military dictatorship crackdown in Brazil, to which I could also add the nations of Chile and Argentina, just to name a few. I apologize for not doing more episodes taking place in South America. They have certainly had their share of disasters, and I can't remember who suggested the Nedelin rocket test accident at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, but that film footage haunted me for days. Thanks for that, and thank you to everyone for the great suggestions. I'm sorry I didn't get to all of them, but I did get to many of them. I would like to especially thank those people whose kind donations kept the podcast running. The webpage will remain up for at least 1 year, and the podcast will still be available to the best of my ability. For those reasons, there will still be operating costs, but if you are set up for recurring donations, I won't be offended if you decide to end that. My heartfelt appreciation goes out to these people who donated to the show and helped defray the operating costs. RL, MT, SR, SS, MM, MA, KC, GQ, ME, and CS. And a very special thanks to Jay, who provided invaluable information for the Tenerife and Concord episodes, just to name a couple. Thank you for everything that you have given. With your help, the podcast remained commercial and service fee free, with the exception of Barry's bookmarks, the bookmarks that always keep their place. I can't say right now what the future holds. Perhaps at some future time I will start another podcast, but it would be less labor intensive and would definitely be on a different subject. One listener suggested that I turn my podcast into a TV series. That is actually a thing with some of the more popular podcasts such as Lore, Two Dope Queens, Homecoming, Dirty John, Serial, Crime Town, Welcome to Night Vale, and Up and Vanished. I do think it is a great idea, and I welcome hearing your pitches that I could offer to network executives, or just any of your ideas. I would say right now, if you want to start a podcast with hopes of making it as a TV series, use true crime as your topic. That's really big for this medium. If you're curious about favorite disasters, here's a rundown of the top 10 most popular episodes of the Podcast of Doom at the time of this recording. The 10th most popular episode, according to web hosting service Castmate, is episode 45 on Hurricane Katrina. Coming in at number 9 is episode 37 on the nuclear explosion and meltdown at Chernobyl. Number 8 is episode 49 on the Challenger and Columbia space shuttle accidents. The 7th most popular episode is episode 40 on the crackdown at Tiananmen Square. At number 6 is episode 44, Napoleon's Invasion of Russia, Part 1. Part 2 was 15th most popular. Maybe listeners were more interested in how Napoleon got into that mess rather than how he got out of it. At number 5 is episode 43, The Story of the Batavia Shipwreck. At number 4 is episode 41 on the Spanish influenza. At number 3 is episode 47 on the Armenian genocide. The second most popular episode is episode 46 on the Donner Party tragedy, and a big imaginary drum roll for the most popular episode, episode 48 on the killing fields of Cambodia. Genocide seems to be a popular topic if you are looking for ideas for your own podcast. And just to be helpful, I thought I would leave you with some tips so that you're prepared for any number of emergencies. In the event of an earthquake, drop, take cover, and hold under a sturdy piece of furniture like a desk or table and ride out the shaking. Do not attempt to flee outdoors. Stay away from glass windows and objects or fixtures that may fall. Don't take shelter in a door frame. That idea has been disproven. If outdoors, stay outdoors. Your chances of survival are better there. For fires, having an emergency exit plan is the best strategy. Avoid using elevators and be careful of hot doors since there may be fire on the other side. When going into large venues like nightclubs, concert halls, or convention centers, be aware of your exits and know that most people will try to escape through the passage that they use to come in. So be aware of the other exits that are available. If you receive an evacuation order due to an approaching fire or other emergency, here are the recommended things to bring: your ID, such as your driver's license, your medications, your wallet, your cell phone, your keys. Don't forget your pets. Pack the basics as time allows, such as clothing, toiletries, flashlights, batteries, sleeping bags, and canned goods. If you have sufficient time, shut off your utilities to mitigate damage to your home. Collect your deed and insurance documents, and only if you have a lot of time before the fire hits should you gather your mementos and electronics. Too many people have died re-entering their house for non-essential items. For both fires and explosions and toxic leaks, you should consider a pre-assembled emergency kit and a family emergency evacuation plan. Please check out ready.gov for suggestions. For explosions, if you receive a bomb threat or notice a suspicious package, notify the police right away and be prepared to offer as much information as possible. If you are near an explosion but not directly impacted, treat it like an earthquake and drop, cover, and hold. After the explosion, wait until you receive an all-clear indication from the first responders, and then prepare for evacuation from your home if necessary. For floods, if a strong storm or wave is forecast for your area, listen closely to the news for details and instructions. Do not walk, swim, or drive through floodwaters. The speed, power, and depth of floodwater is not knowable. Turn around and head for higher ground. Even 1 foot of water can sweep your car away. Stay away from beaches and bridges. If your vehicle is trapped in rapidly moving water, stay inside. If water is rising inside the vehicle, then seek refuge on the roof. If trapped in a building, then go to its highest level, but do not climb into a closed attic. You may become trapped by rising floodwater. Go on the roof only if necessary. Once there, signal for help. Listen to emergency alert systems, NOAA, weather radio, or local alerting systems for current emergency information and instructions. Hurricanes combine lethal winds with strong chances of flooding. In advance of a hurricane, gather needed supplies for at least 3 days. Keep in mind each of your family members' specific needs, including medication. Don't forget the needs of your pets. Make certain your car is in good working condition and your gas tank is full. You may need to evacuate on short notice. Watch or listen to current emergency information and instructions. Once the storm arrives, take shelter during high winds. Go to a FEMA safe room, ICC 500 storm shelter, or a small interior windowless room or hallway on the lowest floor that is not subject to flooding. Use a generator or other gasoline-powered machinery outdoors only and away from windows. Do not go outdoors unless your life is in danger. For a nuclear meltdown, if an accident at a nuclear power plant were to release radiation in your area, local authorities would activate warning sirens or another approved alert method. If you live outside the United States, you may need to check with your National Emergency Management Agency. In the U.S., local authorities will instruct you through the Emergency Alert System, or EAS, on local television and radio stations on how to protect yourself. You may either need to evacuate or shelter in place. You can shield yourself by placing heavy, dense material between you and the radiation source. Go to a basement or other ground area if possible. Stay out of the incident zone. Most radiation loses its strength fairly quickly. As we learned in the Chernobyl episode, if you live under an authoritarian government, you may need to use your best common sense when it comes to public announcements. If it is a nuclear missile attack or other nuclear device, you may still have a chance at survival if you are not in the immediate area of the detonation. Get inside the nearest building to avoid radiation. Brick or concrete are best. Remove contaminated clothing and wipe or wash unprotected skin if you are outside after the fallout arrived. Go to the basement or middle of the building. Stay away from the outer walls and roof. Stay inside for 24 hours unless local authorities provide other instructions. If you are outdoors when a detonation occurs, take cover from the blast behind anything that might offer protection. Lie face down to protect exposed skin from the heat and flying debris. If you are in a vehicle, stop safely and duck down within the vehicle. After the shock wave passes, get inside the nearest, best shelter location for protection from potential fallout. You will have 10 minutes or more to find an adequate shelter. Be inside before the fallout arrives. The highest outdoor radiation levels from fallout occur immediately after the fallout arrives and then decrease with time. Families should stay where they are inside when separated. Reunite later to avoid exposure to dangerous radiation. Keep your pets inside. Presuming your government is still under friendly control, tune into any media available for official information, such as when it is safe to exit and where you should go. Battery-operated and hand-crank radios will function after a nuclear detonation. Cell phone, text messaging, television, and internet services may be disrupted or unavailable, meaning you may be relying on radio or public address systems. Stay tuned for updated instructions from emergency response officials. If advised to evacuate, listen for information about routes, shelters, and procedures. For a toxic leak, a chemical accident or attack could come without warning. Signs of a chemical release include people having difficulty breathing, eye irritation, loss of coordination, nausea or burning in the nose, throat, and lungs. The presence of many dead insects or birds may indicate a chemical agent release. Here's what you should do to prepare for a chemical threat. Build an emergency supply kit and include duct tape, scissors, and plastic to cover doors, windows, and vents. Here's what you should do if you find yourself affected by a chemical leak or attack. Quickly try to define the impacted area or where the chemical is coming from if possible. Take immediate action to get away if it is safe to do so. If the chemical is inside a building where you are, get out of the building without passing through the contaminated area if possible. If you can't get out of the building or find clean air without passing through the affected area, move as far away as possible and shelter in place. If you're instructed to remain in your home or office building, you should close the doors and windows and turn off all ventilation, including furnaces, air conditioners, vents, and fans. Seek shelter in an internal room with your disaster supplies kit. Seal the room with duct tape and plastic sheeting. Listen to the radio or television for instructions from authorities. If you are caught in or near a contaminated area outdoors, quickly decide what is the fastest way to find clean air. Move away immediately in a direction upwind of the source. Find the closest building to shelter in place. For heat waves, extreme heat often results in the highest number of annual deaths among all weather-related hazards. In most of the United States, extreme heat is defined as a long period, usually 2 to 3 days, of high heat and humidity with temperatures above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. In extreme heat, evaporation is slowed and the body must work extra hard to maintain a normal temperature. This can lead to death by overworking the human body. Remember that extreme heat can occur quickly and without warning. Older adults, children, and sick or overweight individuals are at greater risk from extreme heat. Humidity increases the feeling of heat, so while you may think that 90 degrees is nothing to sweat, it is a whole different story at high levels of humidity. If you are under an extreme heat warning, find air conditioning. Avoid strenuous activities. Watch for heat illness, such as confusion, dizziness, or fainting. Wear light clothing. Check on family members and neighbors. Drink plenty of fluids. That's real important. Watch for heat cramps or involuntary spasms of the larger muscles, heat exhaustion, which is an inability of the body to cool itself down by producing sweat, and heat stroke or hyperthermia. Symptoms of heat stroke include dehydration, nausea, faintness, loss of consciousness, and a rise in body temperature that can reach as high as 106 degrees Fahrenheit or 41 Celsius. Never leave people or pets in a closed car. Find places with air conditioning. Libraries, shopping malls, and community centers can provide a cool place to take a break from the heat. If you're outside, find shade. Wear a hat wide enough to protect your face. Wear loose, lightweight, light-colored clothing. Drink plenty of fluids to stay hydrated. If you or someone you care for is on a special diet, ask a doctor how best to accommodate it. Do not use electric fans when the temperature outside is more than 95 degrees, as this could actually increase the temperature indoors. Fans create airflow and a false sense of comfort, but they do not reduce body temperature. Avoid high-energy activities. For blizzards, winter storms create a higher risk of car accidents, hypothermia, frostbite, carbon monoxide poisoning, and heart attacks from overexertion. Winter storms and blizzards can bring extreme cold, freezing rain, snow, ice, and high winds. A winter storm can last a few hours or several days. It can knock out heat, power, and communication services, and place older adults, young children, and sick individuals at greater risk. If you are under a winter storm warning, find shelter right away. Stay off of roads. Stay indoors and dress warmly. Prepare for power outages. Use generators outside only and away from windows. Listen for emergency information and alerts. Look for signs of hypothermia and frostbite. Symptoms of hypothermia include reduced body temperature to as low as 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 Celsius, shivering, slurred speech, weak pulse, clumsiness, or drowsiness. Symptoms for frostbite include numbness in the extremities, any type of discoloration of the skin, hard or waxy-looking skin, clumsiness due to joint and muscle stiffness. So check in on your neighbors, which is good advice in a heat wave as well as a blizzard. Here's what to do if you find yourself confronted by a wild animal. For bears, Yellowstone National Park rangers recommend bear spray. That's bear spray, not hairspray, because there's nothing worse than a dapper bear. Pepper spray inhibits a bear's ability to see, smell, or breathe. Bears don't like loud noises, so the rangers recommend yelling periodically, something like, "Hey bear." Travel in groups. 91% of bear attacks happen to lone hikers. If you encounter a bear, do not run at or away from the bear. Bears can run up to 30 miles per hour. You wouldn't stand a chance. The best advice is to back away slowly. Playing dead is your last option, assuming the bear hasn't pursued you as a source of food. If that is the case, then fight back with any weapons available or within reach. If the wild animal is a cougar or mountain lion, stop and stand tall. Do not run. You want to appear larger than the cougar. Never take your eyes off the animal or turn your back. If the animal continues to approach you, shout, wave your arms, or throw a rock at it. If you're forced to fight, try to gouge the cougar's eyes. That probably goes the same for the bear as well. Shark attacks are on the rise, probably because of warming coastal waters due to climate change and the increase in populations living near the coast, and not because people taste better than ever. To prevent a shark attack, the University of Florida Research Center recommends not swimming at dawn, dusk, or at night, not swimming where people are fishing, where fish are schooling, or where seabirds are feeding, and not wearing shiny jewelry in the water. If you are attacked by a shark, pound it on the nose and scratch at its eyes and gills. To avoid snake bites, stay away from tall grass. It's where snakes like to hang out. Remember that some poisonous snakes can swim, and also that not all snakes are poisonous. The Centers for Disease Control advise, if you see a snake, back away from it slowly and do not touch it. If you or someone you know are bitten, try to see and remember the color and shape of the snake, which can help with treatment of the snake bite. Keep the bitten person still and calm. Seek medical attention as soon as possible. Wash the wound with warm, soapy water immediately and cover the bite with a clean, dry dressing. Finally, don't suck the venom. This is a remedy we have all seen in the movies, and it is completely false and a terrible idea. You don't want the venom in your mouth where it can get back into your bloodstream. For alligators, ABC News reports that Florida has over 1 million gators, and that's just Florida. However, gator attacks are very rare. You can best avoid gators by never attempting to feed one. If you find yourself facing a gator, turn and run as fast as you can. Forget running in a zigzag, that doesn't help. Although gators have a great short burst, they don't like getting into an endurance race with any creature, particularly on dry land. If it does catch you, fight like hell, smack it on the snout, gouge at its eyes, or hit it with a heavy object like a rock. Gators will try to overpower you, especially with their jaws. Aim for the tip of their snout. In regards to famine, there are not many government agency sources available on how to survive a famine in a developed nation. There are plenty of sites and sources for preventing famine in places where you would expect famine, but for some reason, governments in industrialized democracies shy away from the prospect of famine at home. Maybe they don't want to cause a panic. However, survivalist groups are not afraid to talk about how to prepare for a famine. In fact, I would say they are almost expecting one. So their first piece of advice is stock up. Stock up on food, stock up on water, stock up on clothing, and most importantly, stock up on ammo, because there will be a lot of people wanting to take away your food and water. Here's what Survival Life says about food. Choose foods with a long shelf life. You can either start bottling your own food or stock up on canned goods, MREs or meals ready to eat. Frozen food and beef jerkies are also good choices. Learn to perform FIFO, that is first in, first out. Consume your oldest goods first so that nothing goes to waste. Monitor and replenish your stocks every 6 months so that they will be good for consumption. Most likely supermarkets and food shelves will be emptied out quickly. Also, you should be growing your own food just in case this situation turns out to be long-term. When the famine comes, be discreet. Don't go blabbing to your neighbors about your luscious stockpiles of canned fruits and freeze-dried meals. Listen to the news and your local community emergency management agency. And finally, be prepared for when you need to bug out or hit the road with your gear and supplies. You will need a secure location to bug out to, and if you are very well prepared, that location will have a long-term supply of food and water, and it should be suitable for farming. In cases of pandemic, highly contagious diseases have a way of sorting people into two camps, the us's and the them's. It is very easy to slip out of the us and into the them category. Here are some ways to keep that from happening. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Washing your hands often will help protect you from germs. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, or mouth. Practice other good health habits. Get plenty of sleep. Be physically active. Manage your stress. Drink plenty of fluids and eat nutritious food. Wearing a face mask may offer you some limited protection, or more protection than not wearing one. When you are sick, keep your distance from others to protect them from getting sick too. Cover your mouth and nose with a tissue when coughing or sneezing, or better yet, cough into the crook of your arm. It may prevent those around you from getting sick. The Centers for Disease Control offer the following suggestions if you feel you are experiencing the symptoms of a serious pandemic, in this case Ebola. Talk to a doctor immediately. Tell the doctor about your recent travel and your symptoms before you go to his or her office or emergency room. For more information about medical care abroad, see Get Care Abroad at the CDC site. If you are sick, try to stay away from others. Stay home or in your hotel room unless you need medical care. For rebellion, don't laugh, it can happen. The author Anonymous, a very popular author these days, put out a manual called A Survival Guide for Citizens in a Revolution. It is available on the internet for free. The first suggestions are, don't panic, keep a cool head. Make certain to take breaks from the revolution and getting plenty of sleep. You will need to keep your powers of concentration and awareness sharp. Be aware of early indicators like civil unrest in the cities, politicians telling blatant, bald-faced lies, at least on a scale not witnessed before, overt censorship in the media, arrests of political opposition figures, a rise in rumors and fear-mongering, and friends and family in other nations checking in to see you are all right. Next, as we have seen in other survival remedies, be prepared to shelter in place by stocking up on supplies. Anonymous recommends lots of rice, flour, salt, and plenty of water. Next comes organizing a response with your neighbors, including nomination of leaders, drafting response plans to different scenarios, and keeping a list of emergency phone numbers and contact info. Anonymous notes, in a full-scale revolution, the police will not help you, or may even be your enemy depending on the situation. So it is best to be organized with your neighbors. Other emergency responders also may not be available. Social media may be your only reliable source of information if the government takes control of other forms of media. I believe this was a lesson from the Arab Spring of 2012. Anonymous recommends covertly documenting police and government actions, but I would stress that is a very risky and dangerous proposition. Just know what you are getting into when you pull out that camera. Work with your neighbors to discuss who has special needs and has important skills that could be useful in an emergency, such as medical or first aid skills, professional drivers, electricians. Prepare a take box, which sounds a bit like a bug-out bag. In addition to survival supplies, you should include birth certificates, passports, wedding license, insurance policies, whatever it takes to reestablish your former identity, or in a worst-case scenario, get you prepared for your new identity. Prepare a first aid kit, and when working with your neighbors, prepare a first aid station for more serious issues. When the revolution comes, band into small squads of people you know and trust, and be aware of infiltrators. Do not let your children go outdoors unless you know it is safe. Stay with the elderly and those with disabilities to keep them safe. Map out your neighborhood and city area, marking safe and unsafe locations, and share this information with others. It will help everyone compile better maps. Learn to recognize signs of low blood sugar, exhaustion, and dehydration in yourself and others, as well as signs of heat stroke. Also learn to recognize symptoms of asthma attacks and other similar issues and what to do about them. Anonymous then gets into the real meat and potatoes of surviving the revolution. Avoid making journeys by car unless you are a very confident and skilled driver and know your vehicle well and are able to maintain it. The last thing you need is a flat tire in the middle of a riot. If you must travel on foot, travel light. Carry only what you absolutely require for the journey. Carrying large backpacks or bags can make you stand out, and carrying extra weight may make it more difficult to move quickly if you need to get away. Stay away from gunfire and sounds of violence rather than seeking to investigate. If you must investigate, do it discreetly. Ask around for information rather than trying to acquire it yourself. Designated nonverbal signals and codes need to be known to all members of the group. Chalked signs on walls can be helpful, or whistles, handed arm signals, etc. Help those you can, but do not endanger yourself or your group by doing so. Find and collect fire extinguishers and fire blankets. Make sure everyone knows where they are kept and how to use them. Do not steal firefighting equipment if it is in a populated location, or don't steal firefighting equipment at all. Someone may need it more than you. Build a barricade and maintain watch at all points of entrance to the area in which you are staying. Form compounds with individuals you trust and create a barrier of flat, visible ground. Make a barricade of cars on neighboring streets. Always have a vehicle ready in case someone needs medical attention. Refrigerators, washing machines, and other heavy equipment are also useful components for such barriers. Do not trust barricades as safe protection against gunfire. Fill bags with sand or dig trenches for some additional protection, but do not trust your life to such things. If you must fight, it is best to do so inside buildings where guns have less advantage. Remain calm and refrain from sudden movements in the presence of any armed adversaries who are not an immediate threat. There is also advice on protecting against rape, including don't trust new friends and wear a wedding band on your ring finger even if you aren't married. Advice on avoiding looting and robbery, which, like the survivalists, stresses the fact not to brag about your emergency stockpile. How to prepare for a violent riot. Avoidance is the best strategy. I like this. If you get caught up in a stampede, try to move in a diagonal direction with the flow towards the edges of the stampede. Avoid falling to the ground under any circumstances. There, now I don't have to cover what to do in the case of stampedes. Anonymous closes with this sound advice, and whatever happens, stay together and watch out for zombies. I would also add that whether you want to be a hero of the revolution or avoid being the first up against the wall when the revolution comes will highly affect your strategy. Maintaining a low profile may be the best advice, at least until the winners and losers have been sorted out. Here's how to avoid falling under the influence of a homicidal, charismatic figure. Joe Navarro is a 25-year veteran of the FBI, where he served on the National Security Division's Behavioral Analysis Program. He's the author of several books, including the popular Dangerous Personalities. Navarro offers a list of more than 50 ways to identify dangerous cult leaders, such as Jim Jones, John Africa, and David Koresh, but his advice could apply to some of history's more infamous national leaders as well. Here are a few of the warning signs of a dangerous cult leader. He has a grandiose idea of who he is and what he can achieve. He is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, or brilliance. He demands blind, unquestioned obedience. He requires excessive admiration from followers and outsiders. He has a sense of entitlement, expecting to be treated special at all times. He is exploitative of others by asking for their money or that of relatives, putting others at financial risk. He has an exaggerated sense of power or entitlement that allows him to bend rules and break laws. He takes sexual advantage of members of his sect or cult. He is hypersensitive to how he is seen or perceived by others. He publicly devalues others as being inferior, incapable, or not worthy. He is frequently boastful of accomplishments. He needs to be the center of attention and does things to distract others to ensure that he is being noticed by arriving late, wearing exotic clothing, overdramatic speech, or by making theatrical entrances. He doesn't seem to listen well to the needs of others. Communication is usually one way in the form of dictates. Haughtiness, grandiosity, and the need to be controlling is part of his personality. Anyone who criticizes or questions him is called an enemy. He acts imperious at times, not wishing to know what others think or desire. He has magical answers or solutions to problems. He is superficially charming. He has a certain coldness or aloofness about him that makes others worry about who this person really is and whether they really know him. He treats others with contempt and arrogance. The word I dominates his conversations. He is oblivious to how often he references himself. He hates to be embarrassed or fail publicly. When he does, he acts out with rage. He doesn't seem to feel guilty for anything he has done wrong, nor does he apologize for his actions. He works the least, but demands the most. He uses enforcers or sycophants to ensure compliance from members or believers. He conceals his background or family, which would disclose how plain or ordinary he is. And as was the case with Africa, Koresh, and Jones, he will isolate his group of followers physically by moving them to a remote area, or in the case of Africa, containing them in an urban building, so as not to be observed. Again, Navarro's book is called Dangerous Personalities, available on Amazon or Audible. I in no way profit from sales of the book, and I found his article in the journal Psychology Today. Finally, if your space shuttle suffers irreparable damage during liftoff, based on past experiences, your chances of survival are pretty slim. But with advances in technology, a future space mission may have a better chance of rescue than ever before. So if the opportunity for space travel presents itself to you, I say go for it. When I started this podcast, my primary mission was to keep you entertained and hopefully to make you better informed. I feel that I have accomplished that goal, and I look forward to having some free time so that I can finally get more time to listen to other people's entertaining podcasts. As for my standard greeting and sign-off, I want you to remember that vigilant kitten in the eye of the tempest. So keep your ears pinned and your tail taut.
This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my only friend, the end. It hurts to set you free, but you'll never follow me. The end of laughter and soft light. The end of nights we tried.